Why do some Americans have an unhealthy obsession with diversity, sexuality and race? I don't have a good answer, but I agree with your confusion. I don't get it either. A couple years back, my employer contracted with a group to provide us all with cultural competency training. We did surveys to prepare for it and signed up for mandatory meetings. I've been in similar meetings before, and they all have boiled down to this: people are different, and that's good. Not this one. In this one we were told, essentially, that we should all try to determine what each other person's background might be. Race, religion, gender, etc., based on what we can observe, and treat that person according to our understanding of the traits we associate with what we guess their background to be. My employer canceled future training sessions when about half of us complained that we were being taught how to stereotype and discriminate. I just try to not be a jerk. You are absolutely correct. Yesterday, I told my coworkers I'm engaged to a man, since it came up in a conversation. They didn't know about that beforehand. After I told them, they said I am a lot cooler just because I'm gay. What does that even mean? Why would I be cooler? Kinda took offense to it. I'm from Canada, but I feel like this question equally applies. All I can say is that a woman just died in my country because of negligent nurses, who she managed to record calling her racial slurs before she passed away from their neglect and abuse. The last things she heard in this life were being called stupid and worthless. This is an example of how indigenous people and other minorities in a country made up of multiple ethnic backgrounds but where Western culture is the method of operation, similar to the U.S., are treated poorly and not given the same rights as others. People are best with diversity, sexuality and race, because unfortunately in order to gain rights from the government, for example, gay marriage, minority groups have to collectively unite under a particular identity. People don't necessarily love putting themselves into a box just in order to be able to be treated with dignity and respect, and have the same rights as others. But unfortunately, that's what they have to do to gain rights in the current systems that are in place. As a personal opinion, another possible contributing factor is human nature. When you find something that connects you with others, you latch onto it because you support it and a part of something. Because Canada, Western culture is so individualistic, when you don't fit into the mainstream culture that dominates your country, claiming you are a part of a community simply makes you feel less alone and helps people to see their value and worth. Editing to add that, in my example, collectively identifying as indigenous doesn't serve the same purpose as identifying as gay, but to claim indigeneity and to be proud of this, to reclaim culture and heritage that was lost in cultural genocide, acts to strengthen the culture and therefore refuse to be erased, win back the rights that were stolen from you in the first place. Unfortunately, as we can see with Joyce's case, winning the right to be treated with respect in the country's medical system is still an ongoing battle that is very prevalent. Trying to concisely answer this for Reddit is difficult, so it's definitely a simplification, but hopefully gives you an idea of why people might want to unite under these labels and why it's important for many people. It's life and death. Unhealthy obsession is a common human trait. It varies with local though. Not nearly as many people are like that as the media would have you believe. Not all of us. Some of us go with the do unto others. And I'm not even religious, but I learned a long time ago you can divide the world into two basic types: good people and assholes, and both come in all diversities available. Befriend the first and avoid the latter and life is better. Sorry, I am having a hard time understanding you without knowing if you are a woman or a man. Could you clarify? Diversity and race are a thing because Americans are varied people and people waver between. My culture is a thing and I should be allowed to exist without feeling hated too. I like my culture so much that I am going to force it on everyone else while belittling others. Sex is on the list of shit here in America the wealthy can use to keep everyone else fighting. A few of those things are sex, race, political position, religion, money, what area of the country you were born in. In case you are wondering, Americans severely overvalue stupid shit. Here in Brazil we do have a lot of people who care about that too. Brazil is not a diversity heaven where people all get together. Well, no offense, but I'm Brazilian too. And Brazil is still extremely racist. It would do Brazil very well to have more race issues awareness, support for the BLM movement and gender, sexuality equality. Last World Cup, black Brazilians were separated when sitting in the audience at the stadiums because they didn't want to show blacks on TV. Black people in Brazil don't even realize how marginalized they are because it's just so normal. I'm also half European, Dutch, and here we have less racial issues than both US and Brazil, but I applaud for the US at least trying to change its history of oppression through the awareness of racial issues, or gender, sexuality, etc. I feel like on some level this is being pushed harder for the financial metrics companies use to track and profit off you. Just look at the ads that pop up for you. Can they get more specific? The tighter your community, the more you obviously would want to support it by buying only X and only from X creators, distributors. Just look at the fans of sports teams or music groups. Can't help your musical tastes. I hate some of the songs I like. I absolutely mean no disrespect to anyone or their own personal choices. I don't understand why you are asking this when in Brazil it is very similar where you have public holidays dedicated to the various racial groups such as Dia do Caboclo and Dia do Mestiço. Plus don't forget about how in Brazil you also have a multitude of ways of describing someone who is mixed race such as Pardo, Mulatto, Jucara, and Caboclo. What makes Brazil so different than the US in that regard? I'm going to bite the bullet and disagree with the premise. I think this is a mischaracterization of reality that is perpetuated, if not originated and perpetuated, by the American media. A lot of Americans whose only knowledge of politics and the like come CNN and Fox News. Both sides fall for this narrative as well. You have to understand that being a race other than white in America, and to be quite honest, I'm almost certain this is true in Brazil as well, affects your life in ways that the majority of Americans still refuse to recognize. I mean, it's only been 60 years since black people, and I think all minorities, were given the right to vote. There are POC alive today who turned 18 and couldn't represent themselves in their democracy. And there seems to be this idea that after the CRA of '64, everything became perfect and institutional racism was no more. This is incredibly far from the truth. Voter suppression still disproportionately affects people of color. Wealth is racially disproportionate, too, almost entirely due to past racist housing policy, lack of representation, and of course the 200-plus years where black people literally could not own property and were property themselves. This is without even discussing how being a person of color affects your daily life, your relationship with the police, the kind of shit you have to see on the news that makes you afraid to be yourself. These are not my experiences, so I won't go into detail. But the bottom line is that there is no obsession with race. There are people who are negatively impacted by centuries of negative racial policy, and modern racist policy as well, who would like to stop being impacted by that policy. Sexuality is essentially the same deal. except that those who are with the LGBTQ+ community have the ability to hide it. But if you had to hide who you were, don't you think you'd be upset? Don't you think you'd be upset when you saw people discussing allowing businesses to just not serve you because of the way you were born? Reminds me of some older policy. Diversity is a bit more muddled, because identity politics. I'm going to use the word identity politics in a way that is different from its actual definition. Here I mean, putting political focus on identity over policy. And I think most layman Americans will agree that that is how they use the term. Is the main reason for the word's prevalence. And I have my own issues with identity politics. Thing is, most big-name racial theorists, civil rights activists, etc. also hate this form of identity politics. You'll see quotes by MLK and Malcolm X attacking the white moderates' tendency towards appeasement, without actual change floating around the internet quite easily. That said, the main topic for this kind of identity politics is representation, which, while ultimately not useful to changing the aforementioned institutional issues, has an importance to minority groups that I do understand. TLDR. The unhealthy obsession America has with race is neither unhealthy nor an obsession. It's a modern social issue that requires great attention, and the American media has diverted that attention away from meaningful change and mischaracterized several socio-political movements. Because we, American here, have a long and established history of oppressing, disenfranchising, killing, etc. people that don't fit the normal race, gender, sexuality, commonly perceived as white, cis, straight. So the push for diversity and normalization is to remove these barriers. For example, you should be fired for your professional competence, not who you sleep with. Until recently, it was perfectly legal to fire someone for being gay or straight. Edit. Oh my gosh, thanks for the award. My first award. Because it makes for good PR. How else are we Americans supposed to feel good about ourselves and place our rather obvious lampshade on our past and present misdealings than by pretending that we're all the things we really aren't? Truly though, I'm with you. It's ridiculous. Honestly, I think it's just because in America there's more chance of a culture clash. We are the most ethnically diverse nation. If you watch what they report in the media, it seems we're always at odds. Especially this year. But in reality 90% of us get along just fine. But it's not newsworthy to report. The media doesn't get the ratings they want if everything is copacetic, right? It's an election year, so it's extra ridiculous this year. But this shit doesn't happen on the regular. I think there's a lot of people collecting government checks right now that have way too much time on their hands. But I work in the service industry and almost everyone I've seen in the last month is over all this bullshit, and that's at least several thousand people. The media obsess over this. Why? Because it's controversial and sells. You're being misled by the media. Most people don't act or think that way. Those people are a very small portion of the population, but it's spewed everywhere for ratings. Just like any news, reality doesn't sell. Controversy does. The comment section is basically, we were formed by different populations. We're a very mixed country. Clearly, they have no idea that Brazil is exactly the same. We have our native Indians. We had tons and tons of slaves coming from Africa, Italy, Japan, etc. We also had massive influence of European countries such as Portugal, Spain, Netherlands, Germany. So we have a very mixed population too. We also have racism and paternalism disguised as conservative and traditional ways of thinking. My point here is that Brazil has the same mix of people. But we are not even close to being as paranoid as US people regarding gender and race. 'Cause American was founded by about 4 different countries and 3 different religions. plus the people that already lived here, plus the slaves we brought over. Then we united and people had to fight for political power. So they needed easy way to group people together. That's why Italians and Irish weren't originally considered white, but were later considered after the end of the Civil War to keep the power away from freed slaves.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Haircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.